All right, well, Eric McDaniel, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
One of the storylines of this election has been about how same-sex marriage and politics around same-sex marriage are going to affect black turnout and black political affiliation. How do you read that, given your research?
Well, it's interesting to take a look at it. So in my earlier work, I've actually examined this idea of gay rights as a mobilization issue. And what you find is that for religiously conservative whites, it's a mobilizing issue. So while religiously conservative whites and religiously conservative blacks may be opposed to things such as gay marriage, the level of mobilization is actually weaker for African Americans than it is for whites. And so with this growing concern over whether or not African Americans will flee the Democratic Party because President Obama's come out in support of gay marriage, there may be weakened enthusiasm, but you really don't see them welcoming Mitt Romney or the Republican Party with open arms. So there's one poll that showed that Mitt Romney has 0% of the black vote. Kind of indicates that there may be less enthusiasm for the Obama campaign, but there seems to be none whatsoever for the Romney campaign.
Now, another set of issues that has kind of touched on the black community and potentially, I would think, touches on the role of religious institutions has been the spread of voter identification laws requiring photo IDs for voting in various states. How do you see that playing out?
Well, the voter ID laws are pretty interesting because there are kind of two problems that people have with them. Is states are claiming there's voter fraud but can't prove it. Then people are claiming that this will decrease voting, but the proof isn't extremely strong. If anything, it's like it might have a small effect. But for those fearing that it will have an effect and will decrease the voter turnout, especially for minorities, this is where institutions play a very important role. And this is where churches can play a very important role. You find that people who have access to these types of institutions will become more politically involved, but also they can build networks, people who can kind of overcome deficiencies that they may have. So if you have people who have not acquired a government ID, many churches may set up days to make sure everybody goes out and gets their voter ID, gets some type of ID paperwork. And what happens here is you find is that the movement between those who are in these institutions and those who are not, there's a widening gap in terms of participation. So in many ways, what you find is those who are well-connected are even stronger. Those who are not well-connected become weaker. And the hope is that churches can fill this gap. And maybe, while the gap may increase, not increases drastically as it could if they were not there.
Do you think that there's an added charge to the discussion of these voter ID laws in black churches, particularly in areas in the South, because of the history of Jim Crow laws and the regulation of black voting? Very
much so. I think that's one thing you cannot escape. With some of the rhetoric that's come out, now whether it's real or not, but reports that Republicans have openly stated they're trying to decrease the black vote, it brings back the ghost. I mean, again, the VRA is less than 50 years old. The idea of full freedom in voting for African Americans is less than half a century. So you have many people who could not vote, who remember not being able to vote. So one of the classic stories is Lucius Barker, who was the former chair of the political science department at Stanford. While he was a grad student at Illinois working on constitutional law, he decided to go back to his home state of Louisiana to take the voter ID test, which was on the Constitution. And the test was so convoluted and difficult that a man who was getting his PhD in constitutional law cannot pass it. So things like this are very fresh memories, and that these are things that cannot easily be escaped. And I think these ideas of voter laws, especially the fact that they're being championed by the Republican Party, which has been known as being hostile towards minorities, adds even more, I guess, fuel to the fire and a stronger push to fight these laws or work very hard to overcome them.